"Don't move," the stranger shouted from below, his voice cutting through the evening air just as a sharp cracking sound echoed through the forest. Evelyn Harper froze. The branch beneath her boots trembled so hard that she felt the vibration all the way to her fingertips. For one terrible second, she couldn't even breathe. 40 feet below, the forest floor blurred beneath a sea of pine needles, moss-covered stones, and tangled roots. The scent of fresh rain lingered in the air after a brief afternoon shower, and a cold breeze swayed the towering trees around her. Evelyn tightened her arms around the small bundle pressed against her chest. The baby owl she had climbed up to rescue blinked its enormous golden eyes and let out a tiny chirp, completely unaware of the trouble it had caused. "I know," Evelyn whispered shakily. This wasn't exactly part of the plan. The branch groaned again. Her stomach dropped. A few hours earlier, the day had seemed perfectly ordinary. She had left her pack's territory carrying a basket for gathering herbs, hoping to find moonroot and silver sage before sunset. Then she had heard the desperate cries of the owl chick trapped high above the forest trail. The nest had partially collapsed during the storm. Unable to ignore the frightened little creature, she had climbed higher and higher until she finally reached it. Saving the owl had been easy. Getting back down had proven impossible. Now the fading sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, and Evelyn found herself stranded in the upper branches of a massive pine tree with no safe way down. "Can you hear me?" The man called again. She cautiously glanced toward the ground. Standing near the base of the tree was the tallest man she had ever seen. Even from this distance, she could tell he carried himself with unusual confidence. His dark coat moved lightly in the wind, and the setting sun outlined his broad shoulders in gold. Yet it wasn't his appearance that caught her attention. It was the calmness in his voice. The kind of calm that made people believe everything would somehow be okay. "I'm trying very hard not to move," Evelyn called back. "Excellent choice." To her surprise, she heard amusement in his reply. "Keep making that choice." Despite herself, she laughed nervously. The sound escaped before she could stop it. The stranger stepped closer and studied the tree. Evelyn noticed how carefully he assessed every branch, every angle, every possible path upward. He looked less like a traveler and more like someone accustomed to solving problems. "How long have you been up there?" he asked. "Long enough to regret every decision that brought me here." His laugh was low and warm. Somehow it made the growing darkness feel less threatening. The owl chirped again. The stranger looked up and finally noticed the small bird in her arms. "You climbed all the way up there for an owl?" Evelyn glanced down at the chick. Someone had to. For a moment, the man said nothing. The forest grew quiet around them. Wind whispered through the pine needles overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a stream flowed over smooth stones. Then the stranger smiled. Evelyn couldn't fully see it from where she sat, but she could hear it in his voice. "Well," he said softly, stepping toward the trunk of the tree, "I suppose someone has to come rescue the rescuer." The stranger tested the lowest branches before beginning his climb. Evelyn watched with growing disbelief as he moved upward through the pine tree with steady confidence, as though heights meant nothing to him. The fading sunlight filtered through the needles above, scattering patches of gold across his dark hair and shoulders. Every movement seemed deliberate, balanced, and surprisingly graceful. "You do realize this is completely unnecessary," Evelyn called down, tightening her hold on the owl chick. "I am perfectly capable of remaining trapped up here until spring." "That is a bold strategy," he replied without looking up. "Unfortunately, I have already committed to a different one." She could not stop a smile from tugging at her lips. The man continued climbing. A few minutes later, he reached a thick branch several feet below her position. Up close, he looked even more imposing. His features were sharp, his expression calm, and his gray eyes carried a strange intensity that made it difficult to look away for too long. Yet there was warmth there too, the kind that put nervous people at ease without trying. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Embarrassed." "That is understandable." "Cold." "Also understandable." "Hungry." "Very understandable." Evelyn laughed softly. The owl chirped again from her arms, as if adding its own opinion. The stranger glanced at the tiny bird and shook his head. "I hope you know this little creature is causing an incredible amount of trouble. He did not ask to be stuck up here. Neither did you." "That is true." For a moment, silence settled comfortably between them. The forest below glowed beneath the last traces of sunset. Fireflies began appearing among the trees, tiny floating lights dancing through the gathering dusk. Somewhere nearby, a creek murmured through the woods. Evelyn realized she was no longer afraid. Strange. Only 20 minutes earlier she had been convinced she would spend the night stranded in a tree. Now the fear had faded into something else. Curiosity. "What is your name?" she asked. The stranger hesitated for the briefest moment. "Damien. I am Evelyn." "It is nice to meet you, Evelyn Harper." She blinked. "How do you know my last name?" His expression remained perfectly neutral. "Lucky guess." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. That was definitely not a lucky guess. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of genuine amusement crossing his face. "Perhaps I am better at guessing than most people." Before she could challenge him further, a sudden gust of wind swept through the treetops. The branch beneath her feet swayed sharply. Instinctively, she grabbed the trunk with one hand while keeping the owl secure with the other. Damien immediately shifted closer. "Easy," he said quietly. His voice was low and steady. "You are all right." Somehow she believed him. The panic that should have followed never arrived. She focused instead on the certainty in his eyes. The certainty that no matter how high the tree stood or how dark the forest became, he intended to get her safely back to the ground. And for reasons she could not explain, that certainty mattered far more than it should have. Damien studied the branches above them for several seconds before making his decision. Evelyn could practically see him calculating every possible route through the tree. The sky had darkened considerably now, and the first stars were beginning to appear beyond the canopy. A cool evening breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth through the forest. Somewhere far off, an owl called into the night, and the tiny bird in Evelyn's arms answered with an enthusiastic chirp. "Your friend seems eager to join the conversation," Damien observed. "He thinks he is helping." "Is he?" Evelyn looked down at the owl. "Not remotely." Another laugh escaped her before she could stop it. She had known this man for less than half an hour, yet somehow the tension that had gripped her all evening kept slipping away whenever he spoke. Damien carefully shifted his weight onto a thicker branch and extended one hand upward. "All right, we are going to do this one step at a time." Evelyn stared at the distance between them. "That is farther than it looks." Most difficult things usually are. "Very inspiring." "Thank you." His eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. "I have been practicing." Evelyn shook her head. The branch beneath her feet swayed again, reminding her exactly how high she was. Her pulse immediately quickened. Damien noticed the change in her expression. He always seemed to notice everything. "Look at me," he said gently. She did. "Not the ground." "Easy for you to say." "Actually, it is easy for both of us." The confidence in his voice grounded her more effectively than she wanted to admit. Slowly, she released one hand from the tree trunk. The owl shifted comfortably against her chest. "You climbed all the way up here for a bird you have never met before," Damien said. "That tells me something." Evelyn hesitated. "What does it tell you?" "That you are the kind of person who cannot walk away when someone needs help." She looked down at him, surprised by the answer. Most people in her pack described her as overly curious, distractible, or hopelessly soft-hearted. No one had ever made it sound like a strength. The silence stretched between them for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Finally, Evelyn glanced away first. "You make a lot of assumptions for someone who supposedly guessed my last name." Damien smiled. "Fair point." Another breeze moved through the treetops, rustling thousands of pine needles overhead. Fireflies drifted through the growing darkness like floating lanterns. The forest seemed transformed after sunset, quieter and somehow more magical. Evelyn suddenly became aware that she had completely forgotten about the time. Her family would be worried by now. "I should have been home hours ago," she admitted softly. Damien's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Concern flickered through his eyes. "Then let us get you there." Something about the way he said it made the words feel less like a suggestion and more like a promise. Evelyn could not explain why, but she believed him completely. And as she looked at the stranger standing only a few feet below her among the branches, she found herself wondering a question far more dangerous than how she was going to get down. She was beginning to wonder who Damien really was. Damien glanced upward once more, measuring the distance between them. The darkness was creeping steadily through the forest now, turning the spaces between the trees into deep pools of shadow. Above them, the first stars shimmered faintly through gaps in the canopy. Evelyn shifted carefully against the trunk, trying not to think about how long she had been stranded there. The owl chick tucked beneath her arm seemed perfectly content, occasionally fluffing its feathers as though spending the evening 30 feet above the ground was entirely normal. "All right," Damien said. "We are going to move a little closer." Evelyn immediately frowned. "You say that as if it is simple." "It is simple. That is easy for the person not trapped in a tree to say." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Fair observation." He climbed another few feet upward. The branch supporting him barely moved beneath his weight. Evelyn noticed it again, the strange contradiction she could not quite explain. He looked like a man traveling alone through the forest, yet everything about him suggested discipline, strength, and confidence. Even the way he moved seemed practiced. Nothing wasted, nothing uncertain. He finally reached a position nearly level with her. The distance between them was now small enough that she could clearly see his face despite the fading light. His eyes were striking. Gray, but not ordinary gray. They reminded her of storm clouds rolling across a winter sky. Calm on the surface, powerful underneath. "There," he said softly. "Much better." Evelyn looked down and immediately regretted it. Her stomach flipped. "Definitely not better." "Then stop looking down. You repeat that advice a lot. Because you keep ignoring it." The owl chirped again. Damien looked at the bird. "At least one of you seems relaxed. He has no responsibilities. A wise life choice." Evelyn laughed despite herself. She had never expected to spend her evening joking with a stranger while trapped in a pine tree. Yet somehow the absurdity of the situation made it easier to forget her fear. For a few moments, neither spoke. The forest settled around them. Crickets sang in the undergrowth. A cool breeze drifted through the branches overhead. Somewhere far away, water moved gently through a creek bed. It felt strangely peaceful. Then Evelyn noticed something. Damien's gaze had shifted toward the owl. Not with annoyance. Not with impatience. With genuine curiosity. "You really care about that little guy, do you not?" he asked. She looked down at the bird. "Of course. Even after he caused all this trouble? Especially then." Damien studied her quietly. Something changed in his expression. Not dramatically, just enough that she noticed. As though her answer mattered more than it should have. "Most people would have walked away," he said. Evelyn shrugged carefully. "Most people are probably smarter than me. I do not think that is the reason." His voice was thoughtful now. Serious. The teasing had faded. Evelyn felt warmth rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. Before she could respond, a sudden cracking sound echoed through the branches above them. Both froze. The owl tucked itself closer against Evelyn's chest. Damien's eyes immediately lifted toward the source of the noise. The branch supporting part of the damaged nest shifted again. Not enough to cause danger, but enough to send a shower of pine needles drifting downward around them. Evelyn swallowed. "Please tell me that is normal." Damien watched the movement carefully before returning his gaze to hers. "It means we should not wait much longer." Then he extended his hand toward her. "Steady. Certain. Patient." "Evelyn," he said quietly. "Trust me." For a moment, Evelyn simply stared at the hand extended toward her. It was a perfectly ordinary gesture. Simple. Reasonable. Yet it somehow felt enormous. The distance between them was barely a few feet, but crossing it meant letting go of the tree that had become her only source of security for the past several hours. The owl chick shifted beneath her arm and blinked up at her with complete trust. "You know," she said nervously, "if this goes badly, I would like it officially noted that this was your idea." Damien's expression remained calm. "That seems fair." "Good. I am glad we have established responsibility." His eyes softened with amusement. "Evelyn." She looked at him. "Yes. You are doing it again." "Doing what?" "Talking because you are nervous." Evelyn opened her mouth to argue, then immediately closed it. Unfortunately, he was right. The realization only made her more flustered. Damien waited patiently, never rushing, never pressuring, just standing there with that impossible confidence that somehow made everything feel manageable. Finally, Evelyn took a slow breath and shifted her grip on the owl. Carefully, she extended one hand toward him. Their fingers met. Warm, steady, strong. The contact lasted only a second before he adjusted his hold to help support her balance. But something about it made her pulse stumble unexpectedly. She immediately blamed the height. It was definitely the height. "All right," Damien said. "One small step." Evelyn nodded. Then she looked down, instantly regretted it. Bad choice, Damien observed. Extremely bad choice. Eyes here. She forced her attention back to him. Somehow that helped. Slowly, she moved one foot toward the neighboring branch. Pine needles scattered beneath her boot. The branch swayed slightly. Her stomach followed. Damien's grip tightened just enough to steady her. Good, he said. Keep going. Another step. Then another. Each movement brought her closer. Confidence began replacing fear. The forest no longer seemed quite so intimidating. The darkness no longer felt quite so deep. She was almost there. Then the owl suddenly flapped its wings. Startled, Evelyn instinctively tried to protect it. The unexpected movement threw off her balance. She gasped. The branch bounced beneath her feet. Damien reacted immediately, shifting closer to stabilize her before she could panic. For one embarrassing second, she found herself half leaning against him while desperately trying to maintain dignity. I would like to blame the bird, she announced. I think the bird would disagree. The owl chirped proudly. See, Damien said. No remorse whatsoever. Evelyn laughed despite herself. The sound echoed softly through the trees. For a brief moment, neither moved away. The forest seemed strangely quiet around them. Fireflies drifted through the darkness like tiny floating stars. Cool evening air carried the scent of pine and rain between the branches. Then Damien glanced toward the damaged nest above them. His expression changed. Not alarm, not fear, just careful focus. Evelyn followed his gaze. The nest had shifted again. Only slightly, but enough to remind them that they could not remain there forever. Damien looked back at her. His voice was calm as ever, but there was new determination in it now. We are close, he said quietly. Just a little farther, and I will get you safely down. The branch beneath them creaked softly as the wind moved through the treetops. Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken again. They were closer to safety now, but somehow that made every step feel more important. She carefully adjusted her hold on the owl chick while Damien remained beside her, steady as the trunk itself. The little bird seemed perfectly content with the arrangement. I would like to point out, Evelyn said quietly, that I rescued him from one dangerous situation only to introduce him to a completely different one. An unfortunate side effect of heroism, Damien replied. Do heroes usually end up stranded in trees? Only the memorable ones. Evelyn shook her head, smiling despite herself. The darkness continued settling across the forest. Moonlight began filtering through the branches overhead, painting silver patterns across the needles. The air felt cooler now, fresh, clean. Somewhere beyond the trees, a stream reflected the rising moon like liquid glass. Damien studied the route downward. There is a wider branch about 6 feet below us, he said. Once we reach it, the rest will be easy. Easy, Evelyn repeated. You keep using that word very confidently. Because I believe it. She glanced toward him. There was no arrogance in his voice. No attempt to impress her. Just certainty. The kind that came from someone who rarely doubted himself. Carefully, she followed his guidance. One step, then another. Damien remained close enough to help if necessary, but never so close that she felt incapable. Somehow he always seemed to know exactly when to offer support and when to let her find her own balance. The realization surprised her. Most people either underestimated her completely or expected her to manage everything alone. Damien did neither. As they moved lower through the tree, the owl suddenly stretched its wings. Evelyn immediately checked on it. Are you all right? She asked the tiny bird. The chick blinked at her. Damien watched the exchange with obvious curiosity. You know it cannot answer. That does not mean I should stop asking. Fair point. Evelyn gently brushed a loose feather back into place. He has had a long day. So have you. The words were simple, but something about the way Damien said them made her pause. Concern. Genuine concern. Not because he felt obligated. Not because he expected anything in return. He simply cared. The realization warmed her more than it should have. For a moment neither spoke. The forest hummed quietly around them. Crickets sang beneath the ferns. Fireflies drifted between the trees. The moon climbed higher above the canopy. It felt strangely removed from the rest of the world, as though only the two of them existed inside this pocket of silver light. Then Evelyn noticed a faint scratch across Damien's hand where rough bark had brushed against his skin during the climb. It was not serious, barely more than a scrape. Yet her attention immediately settled on it. Your hand, she said. Damien glanced down. It is nothing. You say that very quickly. Because it is true. Evelyn frowned. You climbed halfway up a tree to help a stranger. And, and now you have a scratch. Damien looked genuinely confused. Evelyn, compared to your situation, I think I came out ahead. She stared at him for a second before laughing softly. Somehow, without realizing it, she had stopped worrying about herself entirely. And for reasons he could not explain, Damien found himself smiling the moment he heard her laugh. The wider branch Damien had mentioned finally came into view beneath them. It stretched nearly 4 feet across, sturdy enough that even Evelyn could tell it would safely support their weight. Relief washed through her so suddenly that she nearly laughed. For the first time all evening, the ground no longer felt impossibly far away. I think I love that branch, she admitted. That is a very strong emotional commitment. You did not spend the last several hours trapped above it. Damien smiled. The expression appeared briefly before disappearing again, but Evelyn caught it this time. The realization surprised her. For someone who carried himself with such control, his smiles seemed oddly rare, which somehow made each one feel important. Carefully, she lowered herself onto the broader branch. The owl chick immediately hopped from her arm onto the edge of the damaged nest nearby and began inspecting its surroundings with obvious confidence. Evelyn stared at it in disbelief. You could have acted that calm hours ago. The bird tilted its head. Damien folded his arms. I believe he is pretending none of this was his fault. An impressive strategy. Apparently very effective. The two of them watched the tiny owl for a moment. The moonlight filtering through the trees illuminated its soft feathers in silver and gold. Around them, the forest had fully settled into night. Fireflies floated through the darkness like drifting lanterns. The distant sound of running water blended with the gentle chorus of crickets below. It felt peaceful, almost dreamlike. Evelyn slowly released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thank you, she said quietly. Damien looked at her. For what? For stopping. He seemed genuinely confused. Stopping. Most people would have kept walking. The words escaped before she could stop them. Once spoken, they lingered between them. Evelyn looked away toward the forest. You heard someone calling for help in the middle of nowhere and decided to climb a tree after sunset. That is not normal. Perhaps not. You could have ignored me. Damien was silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. Thoughtful. No. Just that single word. Simple. Certain. Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just a quiet warmth she could not explain. She had spent years meeting people who measured everything by status, obligation, or personal benefit. Yet Damien had never once asked who she was, what family she belonged to, or whether helping her served any purpose. He had simply stayed. The realization mattered more than it should have. Below them, a cool breeze moved through the forest floor. Pine needles rustled softly. Somewhere beyond the trees, clouds drifted across the moon. Damien glanced upward toward the nest. His attention settled on the owl chick, which had finally climbed back into its home. Safe. Comfortable. Exactly where it belonged. A strange feeling settled over him then. Satisfaction. Not because the rescue was nearly complete. Not because the situation had been resolved. Because Evelyn was smiling. He had spent years solving problems far more complicated than this one. Yet somehow, watching her relax brought a deeper sense of accomplishment than any victory he could remember. The thought caught him off guard. Before he could examine it further, a faint sound drifted through the forest. Hoofbeats. Distant but unmistakable. Damien's expression changed almost imperceptibly as he listened. Evelyn noticed immediately. What is it? She asked. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered through his eyes. Then it vanished just as quickly. Nothing, he said. But somewhere beyond the trees, the sound of approaching riders was growing closer. The hoofbeats grew louder with every passing second. Evelyn turned her head toward the distant trail winding through the trees. At first she could see nothing except shadows and moonlight. Then faint lanterns appeared between the pines. 1, 2, 3. More followed behind them. The glow moved steadily through the forest, weaving between the trunks like a procession of wandering stars. That seems like more than nothing, Evelyn said quietly. Damien exhaled through his nose. The sound almost resembled resignation. Perhaps a little more than nothing. She studied him carefully. The calmness she had grown accustomed to remained, but something else had appeared beneath it. Not fear. Certainly not fear. It was the expression of someone whose peaceful evening had just become considerably more complicated. The riders emerged into the clearing a minute later. There were at least a dozen of them, all mounted on powerful horses. Their dark cloaks shifted in the night breeze, and silver insignias gleamed beneath the lantern light. The moment they spotted Damien in the tree, several visibly relaxed. One older rider immediately urged his horse forward. "There you are," he called. His voice carried equal parts relief and frustration. "We have been searching half the territory for you." Evelyn blinked. Searching for him? Damien closed his eyes briefly as though he had expected this outcome from the beginning. "I was occupied." The older rider followed Damien's gaze upward and finally noticed Evelyn sitting on the branch. His eyebrows rose. Then his attention shifted to the owl chick nestled safely in its repaired nest. For several seconds he said nothing. The silence was almost impressive. "Occupied," he repeated carefully. "Yes, with a bird. Among other things." Evelyn looked between them, increasingly confused. None of this made sense. The riders carried themselves like soldiers. Not ordinary travelers. Not merchants. Certainly not hunters. Every detail about them suggested discipline and authority. Then something even stranger happened. The older rider dismounted. So did every other rider behind him. One after another, they stepped onto the forest floor and stood in formation beneath the tree. The clearing suddenly felt very still. Evelyn's pulse quickened. The older man placed a hand over his chest and bowed his head slightly toward Damien. Every other rider immediately did the same. "Your Majesty," he said. The words seemed to echo through the night. Evelyn froze. For one second she genuinely thought she had misunderstood. Her mind searched for another explanation. A different meaning. A joke. There was none. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she turned toward Damien. The moonlight illuminated his face. The same face she had been talking to for hours. The same man who had climbed a tree to help a stranger rescue an owl. Yet now every detail suddenly looked different. The confidence, the authority, the certainty. It all fit together in a way it had not before. Damien met her gaze. For the first time all evening, he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Evelyn," he said carefully. "I can explain." But Evelyn could only stare at him. Because the mysterious traveler she had spent the evening laughing with was not a traveler at all. He was the Alpha King. Evelyn could not remember the last time she had been so completely speechless. The forest, the moonlight, the riders, even the owl perched safely in its nest all seemed distant now. Her thoughts circled around a single impossible fact. Damien was the Alpha King. The man who had spent the evening teasing her about birds and branches. The man who had listened when she talked too much because she was nervous. The man who had climbed a tree himself instead of ordering someone else to do it. Below them, the riders remained respectfully silent. No one seemed willing to interrupt whatever was happening between their king and the stunned young woman staring at him from 3 feet away. Damien rubbed the back of his neck in a gesture so unexpectedly human that it almost made Evelyn laugh. "Almost. You did not tell me," she finally managed. "I know. You let me talk to you like you were an ordinary traveler." A faint smile appeared. "I was an ordinary traveler. At least for tonight." Evelyn shook her head. "I accused you of making bad decisions. You were not entirely wrong." One of the riders coughed discreetly below. Damien ignored him. Evelyn stared for another moment before something unexpected happened. The shock began fading, replaced by a realization that settled gently into place. The title changed nothing about what had happened. He was still the same man who had stopped to help. Still the same man who had stayed when he could have walked away. Somehow that mattered more than any crown. Damien seemed to notice the shift in her expression. Relief softened his features. "You are not angry?" he asked. "Should I be? Most people are when they discover I have not been completely honest." Evelyn glanced toward the riders, then back at him. "I am mostly trying to process the fact that an entire royal search party was sent into the forest because their king was rescuing an owl." For the first time all evening, Damien laughed openly. The sound was warm and genuine. Several riders exchanged surprised looks as though they had not heard that laugh in a very long time. The owl chose that exact moment to chirp proudly from the nest. "See," Evelyn said. "He is very pleased with himself." I noticed. Together they finally climbed the remaining distance to the ground. When Evelyn's boots touched solid earth, relief washed through her. She had never been happier to stand on a forest floor. One of the riders brought Damien's horse forward. The magnificent black stallion stepped into the moonlight, its coat shining like polished obsidian. The moment felt different now. Final somehow. Damien accepted the reins, but did not immediately mount. Instead, he reached into his coat and removed a small silver crest engraved with the symbol of the royal wolf. The moonlight gleamed across its surface. Without a word, he placed it in Evelyn's hand. She looked down at it in confusion. What is this for? Damien's gray eyes met hers. The same steady eye she had trusted high above the ground. Keep it. Why? For a brief moment, the Alpha King looked less like a ruler and more like the man she had met in the tree. Because I would like to see you again, Evelyn Harper. The forest seemed to fall silent around them. Then Damien mounted his horse and turned toward the waiting riders. As the royal party disappeared between the moonlit pines, Evelyn stood motionless with the silver crest resting in her palm. What she did not know was that before dawn arrived, the Alpha King would cancel 3 political meetings, ignore a stack of urgent reports, and ask only one question. Tell me everything you can find about Evelyn Harper.